December 20th, 1943, 2:47 p.m., 11,000 feet above German farmland. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler pulls his Messerschmitt Bf 109G-6 into position 30 feet off the right wing of the most damaged aircraft he has ever seen still flying. The American B-17 bomber shouldn't exist. Not in the air. Not in any form recognizable as an aircraft. The entire nose section is shattered, plexiglass gone, metal framework exposed like broken ribs. The tail section is barely attached, hanging by what appears to be little more than hope and a few structural members. The right stabilizer has a hole large enough to crawl through. Bullet holes, hundreds of them, perforate every surface. Blood is visible on the interior surfaces, dark stains that tell of crew casualties Stigler can only imagine. Through the shattered nose, Stigler can see directly into the cockpit. The American pilot is hunched over the controls, his face pale, his leather jacket torn and stained. The co-pilot slumps beside him, either unconscious or dead. In the waist section, visible through the destroyed gun positions, other crew members move weakly, tending to wounded. Stigler's hand rests on his control stick, his thumb inches from the firing button that would unleash 4 machine guns and a 20mm cannon. The crippled bomber is helpless. One burst would finish it. The kill would be his 28th, moving him 5 victories closer to the Knight's Cross that would cement his status as a Luftwaffe ace. He has ammunition. He has position. He has orders. The standing directive from Luftwaffe High Command is explicit. Destroy all enemy aircraft without mercy. No exceptions for damaged bombers. No chivalry for wounded enemies. This is total war, and sentiment is a luxury Germany cannot afford. Franz Stigler's thumb hovers over the trigger for 3 seconds that will define the rest of his life. Then he does something that violates every order, every oath, every principle of military discipline he has sworn to uphold. Something that could, and should, get him court-martialed and executed by firing squad. He moves his hand away from the trigger, pulls alongside the crippled bomber, makes eye contact with the American pilot, and slowly, deliberately, raises his hand in a salute. Not the Nazi salute. The traditional military salute of one warrior acknowledging another. Then he does something even more extraordinary. He positions his Bf 109 to escort the dying American bomber toward Allied lines, using his presence to warn off German flak batteries and discourage other Luftwaffe fighters from attacking. This is the story of the most remarkable act of mercy in aerial combat history. A story buried for 47 years because both men knew that revealing it would mean execution for one and disgrace for the other. A story of the moment when humanity broke through the machinery of total war, when one pilot looked at his enemy and chose to see men rather than targets. The decision Franz Stigler made at 11,000 feet above Germany would haunt him for decades, would nearly cost him his life when discovered by fellow Luftwaffe officers, and would ultimately prove that even in the most brutal war in human history, individual conscience could triumph over orders. 1915 to 1940, the making of a fighter pilot. Franz Stigler was born in 1915 in Regensburg, Bavaria, into a family with deep Catholic faith and a tradition of military service. His father had served in World War I as an infantry officer, returning with stories not of glory but of mud, death, and the senseless waste of young lives. These stories would shape Franz's understanding of war, not as adventure but as tragedy that sometimes could not be avoided. Franz discovered aviation as a teenager, watching early commercial flights at a local airfield. The freedom of flight captivated him. The ability to rise above earthly conflicts, to exist in 3 dimensions rather than being trapped on blood-soaked ground. When he turned 18, he pursued commercial pilot training, earning his license and working as a flight instructor through the 1930s. The rise of the Nazi Party troubled Franz and his family. They were conservative Bavarian Catholics, uncomfortable with the radical nationalism and racial theories that Hitler preached. But as Germany rearmed and the Luftwaffe expanded, Franz faced a choice: be drafted into the Wehrmacht as a common soldier, or volunteer for the Luftwaffe where his flying skills would be valued. He chose the Luftwaffe in 1935, rationalizing that he was serving Germany, not the Nazi Party. It was a distinction that would become increasingly meaningless as the war progressed, but it allowed him to maintain his conscience while serving in uniform. Franz's natural flying ability and instructor experience made him an excellent fighter pilot. He completed training in 1937 and was assigned to Jagdgeschwader 27, JG-27, a fighter wing that would serve with distinction in every theater of the war. His squadron leader was Oberleutnant Gustav Rodel, a veteran pilot whose influence would prove decisive in the events of December 20, 1943. 1940 to 1943, the education in war. Rodel was a different kind of German officer, a professional pilot who despised Nazi ideology while serving Germany with skill and dedication. He was known throughout JG-27 for his strict code of honor regarding combat. His rules were simple and absolute. You fight military targets. You do not strafe parachuting pilots. They are defenseless and therefore not combatants. You do not attack medical aircraft marked with red crosses. You fight with honor, or you do not fight at all. If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you down myself. These weren't abstract principles. Rodel enforced them ruthlessly. In 1941, he court-martialed a pilot in his command for strafing a British pilot hanging in a parachute. The offender was transferred to the Eastern Front, where life expectancy measured in weeks rather than months. The message was clear. In Rodel's command, war crimes meant death, even if the death was unofficial. Franz absorbed these lessons completely. Over hundreds of combat missions in North Africa, Sicily, and eventually Germany itself, he developed a reputation as a skilled but honorable pilot. He shot down enemy aircraft. 27 confirmed kills by December 1943, but he never fired on parachuting pilots, never strafed helpless ground targets, never exceeded the boundaries of what he considered legitimate combat. His fellow pilots thought him naive. Some called him soft. But Rodel protected him, recognizing in Franz the kind of warrior Germany needed, men who could fight without becoming monsters. The North African campaign, where Franz earned most of his kills, provided a unique education in the limits of military virtue. Fighting in the desert, far from ideological battlefields of Europe, Luftwaffe and Allied pilots often observed informal codes of conduct. Pilots who were shot down and survived would sometimes be picked up by enemy forces, treated well, and exchanged. There was respect between opponents, a sense that they were warriors rather than murderers. This chivalric attitude would not survive the strategic bombing campaign that began in earnest in 1943. 1943, the bomber offensive. The war becomes total. The American 8th Air Force began daylight strategic bombing of Germany in 1942, but the campaign reached devastating scale in 1943. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators would strike German industrial targets in formations that stretched for miles, defended by interlocking fields of 50 caliber machine gun fire that created killing zones no fighter could safely penetrate. The bomber offensive was brutal. For both sides, American losses were catastrophic. On some missions, 10% of attacking aircraft were shot down, meaning a crew's statistical survival chance of completing a 25-mission tour was roughly 25%. German fighter pilots faced their own nightmare, attacking formations of bombers that could put up walls of defensive fire while being outnumbered by escort fighters that were increasingly capable. The nature of combat changed. This wasn't the clean, almost sporting combat of the North African desert. This was industrial warfare fought at 25,000 feet, where American bombers dropped tons of high explosives on German cities and German fighters shot bombers out of the sky by the dozens, watching them fall with their crews, young men burning alive or plummeting to earth in aircraft that had become coffins. Franz found himself increasingly troubled by what the war had become. He was defending Germany. That much was clear. American bombers were killing German civilians, destroying German cities, burning German homes. Every bomber he shot down potentially saved German lives below. But he couldn't escape the knowledge that inside each bomber were 10 young men, most of them probably drafted, probably no more enthusiastic about dropping bombs on strangers than he was about shooting them down. They were following orders, just as he was. They were trapped in a war neither side could stop. By December 1943, Franz had seen enough death to last several lifetimes. He had shot down 27 enemy aircraft. He had seen friends die, pilots he had trained with, flown with, drunk with. He had watched bombers explode, imagining the 10 men dying inside. He had seen parachutes on fire, knowing men were burning to death as they fell. He was 28 years old and felt ancient. December 20th, 1943. Morning briefing. The mission. The briefing at Oldenburg Airfield began at 0800 hours. Intelligence reported a major American raid targeting Bremen's industrial facilities, likely 300-plus bombers with fighter escort to the German border. JG-27's assignment. Intercept the bombers after they turned for home, when they would be damaged, low on ammunition, and separated from escort fighters that had reached the limit of their range. Franz listened to the briefing with the weary attention of a veteran who had heard it all before. Take off at 1,000 hours. Climb to 27,000 feet. Wait for bombers to appear. Attack from the sun if possible. Target the engines and cockpit. Avoid head-on attacks against the nose guns. Break off if escort fighters appeared. One detail stood out. The intelligence officer mentioned that damaged bombers often separated from formations, becoming easy targets for individual fighters. Wounded bombers are priority targets, the officer emphasized. They cannot defend themselves effectively. Kill them first. The briefing ended. Pilots filed out to their aircraft. Franz walked to his Bf-109G6, tail number unknown to history, and began his pre-flight inspection with the ritualized attention of someone who knew that mechanical failure meant death. His aircraft was a veteran like himself. The Bf-109G6 was Germany's frontline fighter in late 1943, a refined evolution of a design that dated to 1935. It was armed with two 13mm machine guns above the engine and one 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, supplemented by two 20mm cannons in underwing gondolas. This armament could destroy a bomber with a single well-placed burst. The Bf-109 was also a demanding aircraft. Its narrow-track landing gear made ground handling treacherous. Its high-wing loading meant it dropped like a stone if the pilot lost concentration. Its control surfaces stiffened at high speeds, making high-speed maneuvers exhausting. But in the hands of an expert pilot like Franz, it was a precision instrument. At 1,000 hours, Franz and his squadron took off, 12 Bf-109s climbing into cold December sky. The weather was clear, perfect for bombers, terrible for defenders who preferred clouds to hide in. They climbed to 27,000 feet and waited. The bombers appeared at 1,130 hours, a massive formation of B-17s, easily 300 aircraft, flying in the tight defensive boxes that made individual attacks so dangerous. Franz's squadron positioned itself to attack as the formation turned for home. 1,145 to 1,430 hours. The battle. The attack began at 1,145 hours when Franz's squadron leader ordered them to engage a combat box that appeared to have sustained damage from flak over Bremen. The German fighters dove from altitude, attacking from the sun, their cannons and machine guns tearing into the B-17 formation. Franz engaged a B-17 in the rear of the formation, firing a concentrated burst into its number 3 engine. The engine erupted in smoke and flame. The bomber dropped out of formation, trailing fire. Franz didn't follow. Wounded bombers would crash on their own, and diving to finish them meant exposing himself to defensive fire from other bombers. The battle continued for over an hour as German fighters made pass after pass at the American formation. Franz expended most of his ammunition, scoring hits on multiple bombers but achieving only one confirmed kill, the B-17 whose engine he had destroyed, which he saw crash into farmland below. By 1,300 hours, Franz's squadron was running low on ammunition and fuel. They broke off and returned to Oldenburg to rearm and refuel. The entire process took 45 minutes. Ground crews worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that every minute on the ground was a minute they couldn't defend German cities. Franz took off again at 1,345 hours with full ammunition and fuel. His orders were to search for stragglers, damaged bombers that had separated from the main formation and were limping home alone. These were easy kills, and Franz had no enthusiasm for the assignment. But orders were orders. At 1,430 hours, he spotted it. 1,430 to 1,447 hours. The encounter. The B-17 was flying at approximately 11,000 feet, much lower than the formation altitude, indicating severe damage. Franz approached from the rear, closing to 300 meters to assess the aircraft before attacking. What he saw shocked him. The bomber's entire nose section was destroyed. The plexiglass was gone. The bombardier's position was simply absent, torn away by what must have been a direct hit from a 20mm cannon. The oxygen system was obviously destroyed. That's why they were flying at 11,000 feet, where air was breathable. The tail section was barely attached, the fabric control surfaces shredded. One stabilizer had a massive hole. The ball turret was shattered and hanging at an odd angle. Franz counted bullet holes as he flew closer. He stopped counting at 200. The entire aircraft was perforated. It looked like it had been used for target practice. He pulled alongside, expecting to see defensive gunners swinging their weapons toward him. Instead, he saw something that made his heart freeze. The tail gunner was slumped in his position, motionless. The ball turret was empty, its gunner presumably dead or evacuated to the interior. The waist gun positions were unmanned. He could see two men inside the fuselage, one lying on the floor with another man kneeling over him, applying first aid with desperate intensity. Franz moved forward along the bomber's length until he could see into the cockpit. The pilot was struggling with the controls, his face visible in profile. He looked young, early 20s. His leather jacket was torn. His face was pale with shock or blood loss or both. The co-pilot beside him was either unconscious or dead, slumped forward in his harness. This crew was destroyed. They had fought their battle and lost. They were no longer combatants in any meaningful sense. They were wounded men trying desperately to reach safety before their aircraft fell apart around them. Franz remembered Gustav Rodel's words, "If I ever see you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you down myself." The B-17 was a parachute, a slow, aluminum parachute carrying 10 wounded or dead American boys toward a home they might never reach. Franz's thumb moved away from the firing button. 1,447 to 1,519 hours. The escort. Franz pulled his Bf-109 into close formation on the B-17's right wing, close enough that the American pilot couldn't miss seeing him. The pilot's head snapped around, his eyes wide with shock, and what Franz imagined was the beginning of prayer. Franz raised his hand, removed his glove, and gave a slow, deliberate salute. Not aggressive, not mocking. A salute of respect, the kind one warrior gives another when the battle is over. The American pilot stared at him in disbelief. Franz pointed north, towards Sweden. Neutral territory, 200 miles. The bomber could make it. They could land, be interned, survive the war in safety. The American pilot shook his head firmly. He pointed west. England. Home. His crew. His base. Franz understood. If their positions were reversed, he would make the same choice. Home meant everything. Home meant brothers in arms, familiar ground, safety among friends. Sweden meant survival, but also permanent exile from everyone you fought beside. Franz nodded and settled into escort position. For the next 32 minutes, Franz Stigler committed treason against the Third Reich. When the B-17 approached German anti-aircraft batteries near the coast, Franz maneuvered his Bf-109 between the bomber and the flak guns, wagging his wings in the universal signal for friendly aircraft, "Do not fire." The batteries, confused by a German fighter protecting an American bomber, held fire rather than risk shooting down one of their own pilots. When two FW-190s appeared in the distance, apparently moving to intercept, Franz positioned himself aggressively between them and the bomber, sending the message that this kill was his and they should find their own targets. The FW-190s, either respecting his claim or unwilling to start a confrontation with a fellow Luftwaffe pilot, turned away. Franz flew alongside the dying bomber, protecting it with his presence, until they crossed the German coast at 1,519 hours. The B-17 was now over the North Sea, still 100 miles from England, but outside German territory where Franz could no longer protect it. He pulled close one final time. The American pilot looked at him. Their eyes met across 30 feet of empty air, and Franz saw an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. Not gratitude exactly, more like stunned incomprehension mixed with profound relief. Franz raised his hand in a final salute. Then he rolled his Bf-109 inverted and dove away, accelerating toward Germany and whatever consequences awaited him. 1,530 to 1,600 hours. The return. Franz flew back toward Oldenburg with his mind racing through calculations of survival. He had committed an unambiguous act of treason. He had failed to destroy an enemy aircraft. He had actively protected it from German defenses. He had used German resources, fuel, ammunition, aircraft time, to help enemy aircrew escape. If any of this became known, he would be court-martialed, convicted, and executed. The Nazi regime in late 1943 was becoming increasingly paranoid about defeatism and treason. Pilots had been executed for less. His only chance was to lie in his after-action report and hope no one had witnessed his actions clearly enough to contradict his account. He landed at Oldenburg at 1,542 hours. The ground crew noted his aircraft had not expended all its ammunition, unusual after a combat patrol, but not impossible if he hadn't found targets. Franz climbed out, his legs shaking from adrenaline and fear, and walked to the operations room to file his report. The intelligence officer sat ready with his forms. Encounter any enemy aircraft, Oberleutnant? Yes, sir. Engaged a damaged B-17 straggler at approximately 1,445 hours near the coast. Expended most of my ammunition, but the bomber dove into clouds before I could confirm the kill. I lost sight of it and returned to base low on fuel. The officer wrote without looking up. Probable kill? Uncertain, sir. The aircraft was severely damaged. It may have crashed into the sea after I lost sight of it. Very well. No confirmed kill, then. Dismissed. Franz walked out, his heart pounding. The lie had been accepted. He was safe. For now. December 1943 to May 1945. The secret carried. Franz never told anyone what he had done. Not his squadron mates. Not his commander. Not his family in letters home. The secret was too dangerous. In Nazi Germany of late 1943, showing mercy to the enemy wasn't viewed as honorable. It was viewed as treason, possibly even racial weakness, suggesting sympathies with Germany's enemies. He flew for another 18 months, accumulating more kills, eventually reaching 28 confirmed victories by war's end. He survived the war, statistically remarkable given that average life expectancy for Luftwaffe fighter pilots by 1944 was measured in weeks. But he never forgot December 20th, 1943. The image of the destroyed B-17, the wounded crew, the young pilot's face, haunted him. In quiet moments, he wondered if they had made it home. Had his escort been enough? Had they survived the North Sea crossing? Or had the bomber finally given up and crashed into the cold water, killing everyone aboard despite his mercy? He would not learn the answer for 47 years. 1945 to 1990, the silence. After the war, Franz emigrated to Canada, unable to remain in a Germany that reminded him of too much death and too many compromises with evil. He built a new life, married, raised children, and rarely spoke of the war. When he did discuss his combat experience, he mentioned his 28 kills, his service in North Africa, his survival against impossible odds. He never mentioned December 20th, 1943. The secret remained buried. Meanwhile, in America, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, pilot of B-17F, Ye Old Pub, returned from the December 20th, 1943 mission with a story no one quite believed. He reported that a German fighter had escorted his crippled bomber to the coast, protecting it from German defenses instead of destroying it. His commanding officer listened to the report with visible skepticism. "You're certain this German pilot was protecting you, not hurting you toward a specific location for capture?" "Yes, sir. He positioned himself between us and flak batteries. He waved off other German fighters. He saluted us before breaking off. He saved our lives. This will go in your after-action report, Lieutenant. But I advise you not to repeat this story publicly. People will think the stress of combat has affected your judgment." Brown took the advice. He filed his report, mentioned the incident briefly in ways that could be interpreted as confusion or misidentification, and tried to move on. Like Franz, he spent the rest of his life wondering about the German pilot who should have killed him but chose mercy instead. January 18, 1990. The letter. Charlie Brown, now 68 years old and approaching the end of his life, decided he needed to know. He needed to find the German pilot before one of them died. He composed a letter to a combat veterans magazine describing the incident in detail: the date, the location, the yellow-nosed Bf-109, the escort to the coast, the final salute. I would like to find that German pilot. I would like to shake his hand and thank him for my life. The letter was published in January 1990. Brown received responses from dozens of German veterans who flew that day. None were the right pilot. Then, in March 1990, a letter arrived from Vancouver, Canada. Franz Stigler had emigrated to Vancouver after the war. He'd built a new life, raised a family, and tried to forget. But he'd never forgotten December 20th, 1943, when he read Brown's letter describing the shattered B-17, the escort to the coast, the final salute. He knew immediately it was about him. Every detail matched. After 47 years, his secret was revealed. "That was me," Franz wrote. "I was the pilot. I could not shoot you. You were like a parachute." June 1990. The reunion. Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler met in person for the first time in June 1990 at a hotel in Seattle. Two old men, former enemies, separated by 47 years and united by a single act of mercy that had defined both their lives. They embraced like brothers who had been separated since childhood. Then they sat and talked for 8 hours straight, comparing memories, filling in gaps, understanding finally what had happened that day. Franz explained his reasoning. "I looked at your plane and saw the blood, saw the wounded men, and I thought of what my commander taught me, that we are fighter pilots, not murderers. So I did not shoot. I could not." Charlie asked the question that had haunted him. "Didn't you get in trouble? Didn't anyone question why you let us go?" Franz laughed bitterly. "I never told anyone. If I had reported what I did, I would have been court-martialed and shot. I lied in my after-action report. I said I lost you in clouds. No one questioned it. I carried the secret for 47 years, wondering if you survived, wondering if my mercy meant anything, or if you crashed into the sea anyway. We made it," Charlie said quietly. "All 10 of us survived. Because of you." They became inseparable friends for the remainder of their lives. They attended air shows together, gave interviews together, told their story to schools and veteran organizations. Two old warriors who had met as enemies and became brothers through a single moment of humanity in the midst of mechanized slaughter. 2008, the final flights. Charlie Brown died in November 2008, age 87. Franz Stigler died 8 months later in March 2008, age 92. At Charlie's funeral, Franz gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke of the bond formed at 11,000 feet over Germany on a December afternoon 65 years earlier. "Charlie became my brother that day," Franz said. "Not when we met again in 1990, but on December 20th, 1943. I saw him struggling to keep his crew alive, and I knew I could not kill him. Some rules are more important than orders. Some laws are higher than military discipline. Humanity is one of those laws." At Franz's funeral 8 months later, Charlie's widow read a letter her husband had written before his death to be delivered when Franz died. "Franz gave me 47 years I should not have lived. He gave my crew their lives. He gave my children their father. He gave my wife her husband. He did this knowing it could cost him everything. That kind of courage, the courage to show mercy in the midst of war, is rarer than the courage to kill. I owe him everything, and I hope that when we meet again, wherever warriors go after death, I can finally buy him the beer I always meant to share." The final accounting. The story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown became one of World War II's most remarkable tales, not of killing or victory or technical superiority, but of the moment when one man looked at his enemy and chose to see humans rather than targets. Military historians debate whether Franz made the right decision. Some argue he violated his duty, that his mercy potentially allowed the crew to return to combat and kill more Germans. Others counter that by December 1943, the outcome of the war was already determined. 1B-17 crew more or less would not change the strategic balance. But these arguments miss the point. Franz Stigler didn't spare Charlie Brown's crew because of strategic calculations. He spared them because in that moment, looking at the destroyed bomber and its wounded crew, killing them would have been murder rather than combat. He chose to remain human in a war designed to transform men into killing machines. He chose conscience over orders. He chose mercy over military discipline. And for that choice, he paid a price. 47 years of silence. 47 years of wondering if his mercy had meant anything. 47 years of carrying a secret that could have destroyed him if revealed at the wrong time. The salute Franz gave Charlie that December afternoon was not a Nazi salute. It was not even a German military salute. It was the salute one warrior gives another when the battle is over and only respect remains. It was the salute humanity gives to humanity when the machinery of war breaks down and individual conscience breaks through. Two men, one moment, one choice, and a friendship that lasted until death because one pilot decided that orders, discipline, and even war itself matter less than the simple human recognition that some things should not be done, no matter who orders them. Franz Stigler died believing he had done the right thing. Charlie Brown died knowing that he owed his life to an enemy who became a brother. Both men died hoping that their story would remind future generations that even in the worst wars, individual humans can choose mercy. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the B-17 Flying Fortress are both in museums now, artifacts of a war that killed 60 million people. But the story of the salute at 11,000 feet lives on, a reminder that humanity survives even when everything else fails. One pilot, one choice, one salute, and 10 men who lived because an enemy decided to be human instead.